That summer I was 16, the summer my neighborhood became a crime scene. With these words, the late writer Michelle McNamara begins her haunting masterpiece, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. The book starts with a memory from her own childhood, the unsolved murder of a young woman in her seemingly safe suburban neighborhood. This early unsolved mystery planted a seed in her, a lifelong obsession with the questions that linger in the dark, the stories that have been forgotten, the victims whose voices have been silenced. Years later, that obsession would lead her to the cold case of a lifetime, the trail of a shadowy, sadistic, and phantom-like predator who terrorized California for over a decade. He was a ghost, a man who committed at least 50 sexual assaults and 13 murders, and then simply vanished, leaving behind a legacy of fear and a string of unsolved cases. I'll Be Gone in the Dark is the story of McNamara's relentless, all-consuming hunt for this man, a man she would christen the Golden State Killer. But this is not a standard true crime book. It is a haunting, profound, and ultimately tragic exploration of the very nature of obsession. It is a philosophical inquiry into what we owe the dead, and a testament to the power of one woman's courage to stare into the abyss, refusing to let the darkness have the final word. The shadow in the Golden State. To understand the depth of Michelle McNamara's obsession, you must first understand the sheer scale and terror of the man she was hunting. The story of the Golden State Killer is a story of terrifying evolution. The crime spree began in the mid-1970s in the quiet, suburban communities of Northern California. At first, he was known as the East Area Rapist. His methods were chillingly meticulous and designed for maximum psychological terror. He was a prowler, a stalker. He would spend weeks, even months, studying a neighborhood, learning the routines of its residents. He would break into homes in the middle of the night, not with a loud crash, but with the quiet, terrifying precision of a ghost. He would wake his victims, often a couple sleeping in their bed, with the blinding light of a flashlight in their eyes. He would bind them, and for hours, he would subject them to a horrifying ordeal of psychological and physical torture. He would ransack their homes, not just to steal, but to violate. He would take small, sentimental items, a wedding ring, a photograph, a piece of china. He was not just robbing them of their possessions, he was robbing them of their sense of safety, their memories, their very idea of what home meant. For years he moved through the suburbs of Sacramento, Concord, and Davis, leaving a trail of shattered lives and a community paralyzed by fear. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he stopped. A few years later, the crime started again, this time in Southern California. The attacks were different now. They were more violent. The predator was no longer just a rapist, he had become a murderer. For years, law enforcement believed these were two different men, the East Area Rapist in the north and the original Night Stalker in the south. The cases were investigated by different departments in different jurisdictions, and the crucial connection was missed for decades. This monster, this ghost, was able to thrive in the cracks of the system. After his final known murder in 1986, he vanished completely, leaving behind one of the most terrifying and coldest cases in American history. The obsessive in the dark decades later, in the 21st century, this cold case found its perfect antagonist. Michelle McNamara was not a police officer or a private detective. She was a writer, a mother, and the creator of a popular website called True Crime Diary. Her site was different from the sensationalist, gory true crime blogs of the time. It was rooted in a deep and profound empathy for the victims. Her motto was, "Don't fetishize, don't romanticize." For her, the most important part of the story was not the monster, but the lives the monster had destroyed. She was part of a new and growing movement of citizen detectives. Armed with the power of the internet, these dedicated obsessive amateurs could do what the original investigators never could. They could connect across jurisdictions. They could share files and theories instantly. They could spend thousands of hours poring over old case files and digitized evidence, looking for the one tiny clue that everyone else had missed. McNamara became obsessed with the case of the East Area Rapist. She spent countless nights in her home office, what her husband, the actor Patton Oswalt, called her pain cave, falling down the rabbit hole of the investigation. She read every police report, every autopsy file, every witness statement. She created massive spreadsheets tracking every detail of every crime. She was not just reporting on the case, she was trying to solve it. Her obsession was fueled by a deep and abiding rage on behalf of the victims. She was haunted by the thought that this man, this monster, was still out there, living a normal life. He was a grandfather, a neighbor, a man shopping for groceries, while the lives of his victims and their families had been permanently shattered. For her, this was not just a story, it was a profound injustice, and she made it her personal mission to correct it. She was determined to give this ghost a name, and to give his victims a voice, connecting the dots and naming the monster. One of Michelle McNamara's greatest contributions to the case was one of simple, brilliant branding. She was one of the first investigators to be absolutely certain that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same man. She realized that these separate regional nicknames were diluting the public's understanding of the true scale of his crimes. So she gave him a new name, a name that would capture the full, terrifying scope of his reign of terror across the entire state. She called him the Golden State Killer. This act of naming was more than just a clever turn of phrase. It was a powerful act of narrative justice. It took a series of disparate, cold cases and wove them together into a single, epic and horrifying story. It created a new unified identity for the killer, making him a figure of national infamy. Her articles about the Golden State Killer went viral, bringing a level of public attention to the case that it had not had in decades. She was, in effect, pulling the monster out of the forgotten shadows and back into the light, where he could be hunted. Her investigative work was relentless. She cultivated sources within the cold case detective community. She spent hours on the phone with the original investigators, now old men coaxing their memories, but most importantly, she focused on the details. She became obsessed with the seemingly random items that the killer would steal. She believed that these small personal totems held a clue to his psychology, to his identity. Her writing in the book about this process is a master class in empathy. She never loses sight of the human beings at the heart of the story. She writes with incredible sensitivity about the victims, painting vivid portraits of who they were before they were just a name in a case file. She makes us feel the terror of their final moments. But she also makes us feel the richness of the lives that were stolen. This is her philosophical contribution to the genre of true crime. She argues through her work that the only ethical way to tell these stories is to focus not on the darkness of the killer, but on the light of the lives he extinguished. The Human Cost and the unfinished chapter, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, is not a traditional true crime book with a neat and tidy ending. It is a story that is, in a profound and heartbreaking way, unfinished. In April of 2016, after years of deep and often draining work on the book, Michelle McNamara died unexpectedly in her sleep. She was 46 years old. The woman who had spent years hunting a killer, who had lived and breathed this dark story, was gone. She never got to finish her masterpiece. The book that we have today was painstakingly and lovingly assembled after her death by her husband, Patton Oswalt, and her lead researcher, Paul Haynes. This tragic reality gives the book a second haunting layer of meaning. It is not just a story about the search for a killer, it is also a story about the cost of that search. The title itself, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, comes from a chilling phrase the killer once whispered to one of his victims. For 2 years after the book was published, it seemed like the story would end there. But then, in April of 2018, the impossible happened. Using a revolutionary new technique involving genetic genealogy, investigators were finally able to put a name to the ghost. They arrested a 72-year-old former police officer named Joseph James D'Angelo. After more than 40 years, the Golden State Killer had been caught. The book's afterword, written by Patton Oswalt, describes the surreal and emotional moment when the news broke. The monster finally had a face, and the woman who had hunted him for so long, who had given him his name and refused to let the world forget his crimes, was not there to see it. But her work had been essential. She had built a community of dedicated investigators, both amateur and professional, who refused to give up. She had, in a very real sense, built the trap. And years after she was gone, the monster finally stumbled into it. The ultimate message of I'll Be Gone in the Dark is a profound and complex one. It is a chilling portrait of a monster and the decades of terror he inflicted. But it is also a powerful and inspiring tribute to the dogged, obsessive, and deeply human power of the woman who refused to let his victims be forgotten. It is a philosophical testament to the idea that even in the face of the darkest, most senseless evil, the act of seeking the truth, of honoring the memory of the lost, is one of the most powerful and meaningful things a human being can do. It is an inquiry into the very nature of justice. If you believe that the search for truth is a sacred act, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe and let's continue to explore the stories that dare to shine a light into the darkness.